Monthly webinars is a means of supporting RNEO best practice champions and their work and guideline implementation. And our speakers are those involved who are actively involved in BPG implementations, such as our speakers for today. And so today we'll be focusing on the Pearly Rideau's Veterans Health Center's presentation on the simulated fall, using simulation to support the sustainability of best practice guideline implementation in long-term care. So I think this is going to be an excellent topic. Before we get started, just want to go through a few housekeeping items. First, we want this webinar to be informal and interactive. So if you have any questions during the presentation that you'd like to share, please feel free to type it in the chat box. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen, or that little bubble that looks like a speaker bubble. If you click on that and type in your question or comment, and just make sure that you indicate all panelists and attendees so that we all can see it, that would be fantastic. And also, just to let you know that these, as well as other of the webinars, have been and will be recorded, so they can be archived for future viewing. And the slide deck will also be shared with all the participants as well and be on the RNEO website. So if anyone hasn't been able to attend this and you think that this would be a really good webinar for other people to attend, please feel free to direct them to the RNEO website. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you today our two presenters. We have Danielle Acosta, who is on your left-hand side of your screen, and she is an RN and is the collaborative practice leader at the Pearly and Rideau Veterans Health Center, where she promotes collaboration, professionalism, and evidence-based approaches to practice at the point of care. Danielle is passionate about best practices to empower healthcare teams, improve care, and achieve better patient outcomes. And joining her today is Amber, and she's an RPN and has been since 2016 and is the role of the BPSO Liaison at the Pearly Rideau since 2018. She is very passionate about best practice implementation and is excited to be trialing new strategies such as the simulation that we've been talking about today to support the sustainability of practice changes. She's an advocate for evidence-based practice, and she's eager to share the fall simulation experience that she and Daniela trialed throughout organizations. So this is fantastic. So welcome Daniela and Amber. So before we get started, and for those of you who are not familiar with BPSO, I'm just going to briefly explain it to you. It stands for Best Practice Spotlight Organization. And so they're healthcare and academic organizations who are selected through a request for proposals process to implement as well as evaluate the RNEO's best practice guidelines. And it really is a dynamic partnership between the health service organization, academic, and RNEO in terms of implementing evidence-based practice to be able to improve patient outcomes. And so there's a lot of support that we provide with regard to organizations who enter into the program. So if you're interested in more information, please feel free to send myself or Andrea an email, and we'll be happy to field your questions. So now I'd like to open the door to Daniela and Amber. And Daniela and Amber, I'm going to pass the controls to you, Daniela, and you should be able to move your slides.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you see it passed on to you?
Yes, but I'm pressing left. I'm pressing. I did, but it's not working.
Okay, let me just try it again. I'm going to try one more time, and then I won't touch the screen at all. There you go.
Okay. Oh, there.
I'm just standing in front of her.
Oh, no, that's going too far. Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Danielle Acosta, and I am the collaborative practice leader here at the Pearly Rideau, and as Grace mentioned, an RN by training.
And Pearly Rideau, but I'm also an RPN at the point of care.
Today, we're so excited to share with you how we built a very simple post-fall simulation in long-term care. And it was meant to support the sustainability of best practice changes within our facility, specifically related to improving the quality of how staff were doing post-fall assessments, and also how they were coming up with ideas for strategies to prevent falls.
So we'll talk about why and how we ran the simulations on 6 units. Since we're only just starting to use this education strategy, unfortunately, we can't talk about the impact of simulations on our falls rates yet, but we hope to demonstrate the impact of the simulation on learning at the point of care and the engagement of the staff in new practices. So just some background first about the Pearly Rito.
Hi, sorry ladies, if you can just move closer to the mic, you just seem to be cutting out a bit.
Is that better?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so we're just going to give some background on the Pearly here. So it's a seniors village in Canada's capital. And we have a wide variety of services and programs for seniors on site, including assisted living, long-term care, and a day program. We're pretty big. Our home has 450 beds, which are divided into 14 units that serve veterans, residents of the community, and a few specialized units. But the work we're discussing here today is taking place within our long-term care home. So over the last 3 to 4 years, our fall prevention team has been implementing recommendations from the best practice guidelines, preventing falls and reducing injuries from falls. So this is included in strategies such as standardized fall screening processes, implementing the hourly rounding, standardizing the post-fall assessment, and introducing the post-fall huddle. Our implementation is mostly complete, and we're currently in our sustainability phase, and we're making sure that our organization maintains these practice changes on an ongoing basis. Danielle?
Yeah, so our current evaluation process includes a monthly record of our falls rate, as well as seeing how often every month people are completing our fall screening tool, as well as a weekly monitoring of the compliance of our hourly rounding. To get a better look at compliance of the program details though, we can't do that monthly, but what we do is we do like bi-monthly mock inspections that the ministry would do on residents who had fallen, maybe 1 or 2 every other month. And once a year, we do a deep dive chart review of all the falls that occurred within 3 months to see how people are charting and what quality that they're charting, the staff.
And our simulation is focusing on mostly the post-fall physical assessment, so completing a head-to-toe nursing assessment that includes head injury, chest and abdomen, hip fracture, as well as orthostatic hypotension, and the post-fall huddle. So it's a team meeting held directly after the fall, and it has multidisciplinary viewpoints, root cause of the fall. It is person-centered and for fall intervention ideas.
Next slide, please.
Okay, so just give me a second. In terms of compliance, the data captured showed some awesome compliance numbers. We saw that 90% of the staff were documenting on a post-fall assessment and 88% were doing the post-fall huddle, which was great because it really showed that the staff were adopting the policy changes and changing their practice. But with a closer view of the documentation, we actually saw that the quality of the assessments at the bedside was not as expected.
And when we did the mock ministry audits, we found the same thing. So the quality issues we were having were that, for example, the post-fall assessment, it was being done, but staff were skipping like little sections within the assessment. So they were not doing the orthostatic hypotension, or they were filling it out but not doing any evidence of an abdominal assessment, which is all part of the process. And for the post-fall huddle documentation, we found that it's supposed to be a multidisciplinary approach, but staff were instead just doing it on their own or with one other PSW. And also when they had to identify the root cause analysis of the fall, they were just typing something superficial like the resident tripped, as opposed to looking for a deeper cause. So we did have a need to improve the quality that staff were implementing these best practices, even though they were actually doing this assessments. And another interesting thing we noticed is that staff were not doing the orthostatic hypotension a lot. So only 11% compliance when we did our deep dive data capture. So that was something we didn't know why. Were people skipping it because they didn't want to do it, or were people skipping it because the resident couldn't do an orthostatic hypertension? So that was a question we had too. So how, next slide, please. So how do you teach people to do assessments better and improve their skills? Well, that's where simulation-based learning came in for us. For those of you who may not be familiar with simulation, here's my very simplified explanation. Basically, it's a scenario that replicates aspects of a real-world situation, but it's not real. It's completely fabricated. And in this scenario, participants, like nurses, for example, need to respond as though it were real. So for an example that you all, I'm sure, have experienced, when you have a fire drill in your organization, that's not a real fire, but you're expected to respond as if it were real. And so that's kind of what we were trying to do with the post-fall assessment. And to be successful, we wanted to make it a bit less of a drill and more of a full simulation, maybe something you would see in a nursing school. So what we wanted to do was guide participants through the scenario in an interactive way, and then make sure that the scenario had a very well facilitated discussion afterwards to facilitate learning and self-reflection. So some people ask, why did we choose simulation-based learning versus, say, sending out an e-module or an email or doing an in-service? Well, we had already tried a lot of those strategies, and it did work to get people to do compliance, but we didn't want to send out more because we had heard anecdotally that staff were kind of tired of that same type of learning. We also weren't convinced that that would get the effect that we wanted. We had tried simulation before with some code, mock codes, and staff really had a positive thing to say about that. So we knew that they liked an interactive style of learning. And I had just finished a simulation course, so I was interested in trying out my skills in that. And then the last thing is that studies have shown that simulation is a really good way of learning, and there has some evidence that it works well for staff in long-term care. So, so in that being said, we created our own from scratch post-fall simulation scenario for staff to respond to on the unit, with a focus on completing the post-fall head-to-toe assessment and a post-fall huddle. So on the next slide, we're going to introduce you to our resident, Jane Smith. And that's Amber, by the way. And our new resident, she had worsening osteoarthritis and long-standing social anxiety disorder. So what we did is we created this scenario of an unwitnessed fall, and it was geared towards RNs, RPNs, and PSWs. But it would be open to other disciplines if they happen to be around. Like anyone who would respond to a fall was more than welcome to participate. The key here was that we kept our simulation very, very simple. Our resident, Jane Smith, she had no post-fall complications, and the reasons that she fell were very straightforward, and the only underlying surprise thing was that she had orthostatic hypotension. Because if you recall, that was what people were missing. So we wanted to see how people were testing for that. So we were able to create a simulation that really met very clear learning goals for the staff, and to help us learn how we can improve quality for them. Yes, so we weren't aiming to trick anybody in the simulation.
We created a simulation from scratch, but we used a template from sim1.org. to create the objectives, to design the scenario, create the script, and plan the props in the environment. Just a disclaimer, simulation-based learning is an industry of its own, a field with its own body of knowledge. We are definitely not experts in the field, and this simulation is not a professional one, but we did try as best as we can to follow sim design evidence and recommendations while designing the simulation. Next slide, please. So according to the standards of practice for simulation, having a really good pre-brief is important to establish a psychologically safe environment for participants. So we have to really connect with the participants before the simulation to explain what it's about and to create a non-judgment culture and ensure that everyone knew this was not a test and that their employment depended on it. Because that's one of the risks of simulation. People can get nervous and feel bad, and we really do not want that. But if you imagine in long-term care with limited resources, as well as the size of our organization, getting this message out to every staff member was not going to be easy. So here's what we did. We did two things. The first thing was we emailed all of the registered staff in the facility at the beginning of the month. And it had all the information about what the simulation was going to be about. And it also had what you can see on the screen there, this profile for the fake patient that we created. And we also explained about culture and what we were looking for and that it was not a test. That was the first thing. And that just got the word out. But then on the day that we actually did the simulation on a random unit, we actually connected with those staff before the simulation to tell them what was happening and to pre-brief them again. So everybody on the unit kind of knew that a simulation was coming at some point that day. And there were a few situations where we actually pulled the emergency bell without telling anybody, but then did a pre-brief as they arrived. And there were pros and cons to both situations, but I think it's actually, we found it was better to just prepare people at the beginning of the shift and tell them that it's going to happen at some point during the day. Next slide, please. So during the simulation trial, we did it on 6 units, 4 on days and 2 on evenings. The majority of the attendees were RNs, RPNs, and PSWs. And on average, about 4 to 5 staff attended each simulation, which ran approximately 7 to 10 minutes. So once a unit was pre-briefed at the start of the shift, Daniela and I would secretly pick a time to set up the simulation. We usually picked a time that we knew was best for the unit to optimize participation rates. So it would be around med passes, generally just before or after break times. And then we would sneak onto the unit. It would take us maybe 5 minutes to prepare, and we'd either set up in a dining room, an empty bedroom, or a common space, whichever was empty. We actually did it in the courtyard one day. But all of our scenarios were generally the same, with maybe slight differences for the issue instigating the fall. One day I went to get a book or to smell the flowers. But ultimately, though, she had orthostatic hypotension and was weak and unsteady on her feet as well. She didn't wear any shoes. So since I was the patient immersed in the simulation, Daniela was the observer. She was not in the simulation and she did not engage in questions. However, she did provide values and outcomes to an assessment. So if the staff member put on the blood pressure cuff, Daniela would provide them with the value, but they had to go through the motions of the assessments to get the outcome.
And if they didn't do the full motions, then I wouldn't offer any results. So they had to actually do the whole thing. Next slide, please. So evidence in simulation has also shown that debriefing after a simulation leads to better knowledge and outcomes, like learning outcomes. So if you did a simulation where everybody acted on the situation and didn't talk about it after, it actually didn't solidify any learning. So it was very important. It was a very important part of the process for us. And to be honest, we were really nervous about it because you can imagine that we were taking staff off the unit for 10 minutes to respond to a fake fall. And now we were going to ask them to stay another 10 minutes to talk about this big fall. So we were worried that people were going to really not like that. But what was really cool was that, and a pleasant surprise, is that we can confidently say that each of our 6 debrief sessions were super dynamic and fruitful conversations. Not one person complained to us about that. And as a facilitator, that's what I did. I'm Daniela. It was cool because I could actually see light bulbs go off in the staff's eyes as we were talking through the expected processes and getting them to reflect on how they responded to the situation and how that compared to what we were supposed to do in terms of best practices. I learned from this, though, that you definitely need to be prepared when you're doing a facilitation. Make sure your notes are very clear as you write them down while you're paying attention to the scenario. You should write down observations that you found, and you also should have a competency checklist there so that you know in your head you know what's supposed to happen, but in the moment of facilitation it's easy to forget and kind of ruffle your mind. So make sure you have everything clearly written out. I actually didn't, and I relied completely on memory for facilitation, and going forward, I'm gonna definitely have better notes because it would lead to a more effective conversation. But overall, it was very successful. And they lasted 7 to 10 minutes, and we made sure they were held in different rooms than what we actually did the simulation, as that's part of the best practices for that.
Next slide, please. So the entire runtime from when we pulled the emergency bell till the end of the debrief was about 18 to 20 minutes. As we mentioned earlier, the impact on falls rates is still to be determined, but we look forward to seeing that. We also, during the debrief, we provided our participants with an evaluation form and found that 86% found the simulation relevant, good quality, and liked it as a learning strategy. And the staff identified learning was how to host a post-fall huddle, including residents and other disciplines in the huddle, and the importance of assessing thoroughly from head to toe and the orthostatic hypotension. For example, most simulations didn't do an OH, but they all said in the debrief that they didn't do it, but they would never do it right after a fall because the resident is agitated most of the time, but they would wait until the resident was more calm. So this told us that maybe it is being done, but not charted where we expect. So we really have to look into that one. As for our observations, we identified trends in how staff were completing these assessments, identified the staff learning needs, and we actually found certain call bells that weren't working on the unit. So that was a great thing to find out so we could fix that.
Yeah, we pulled the emergency bell and then waited like 6 minutes. We're like, what's happening?
Yeah, the call bell wasn't working. And then another observation that Daniela was talking about that we were really surprised about was how engaged the staff really was in every debrief session.
Next slide, please. So when it comes to lessons learned, some of the things we came up with were having clear learning objectives for your staff that you're trying to train and building your simulation towards these objectives. So you really need to know who you're training and what you're training them for and what you're trying to learn. Many people didn't think it was a good idea to inform the staff beforehand that the fall was going to happen because then they would have time to prepare. But what we wanted, our objective was to train people to do a better quality post-fall assessment. So the more prepared they actually were was really actually just better for us. It wasn't meant to be an emergency response, like testing them. So having clear objectives and building is really important. Another thing is that when we created our simulation, we wanted the people who were running it, for example, Amber and I, to have a good rapport with the staff in general across the home. We felt that because the staff kind of knew us well, they responded really well to the fall simulation, and they felt more comfortable when they were going through the simulation. So that's really cool. Keeping your simulation short and simple is important. Like I said before, the more things you want to train and test in a simulation is going to make it super long and lead participants off course. So just pick one or two things and then kind of stick with that. Knowing your resources and timing. Amber mentioned we only ran the simulations at the times we thought were best for the staff. Using thoughtful cueing means that within your simulation, you should have planted in the script certain words that the patient says or the resident says that moves along the simulation. So for example, if they were doing a head-to-toe assessment and forgot a major body system, the patient, she had anxiety disorder, so she would, within her script, kind of get a little anxious about her hips or her stomach or whatever area they missed, to try and encourage the staff member to reassess that area. But we had to be careful, because if we ruminated on it too much, the participants would think that there was a problem they were missing there, and there wasn't. So it's very like a balance. And then the last thing is just planning your briefing in advance. Like I mentioned, make sure you're really prepared with your checklist. So going forward with this, we felt that our fall simulation trial was pretty successful. We have some things we're going to improve on, but the fall team has decided it was worth the investment to go forward and do simulations on all the other units going forward on days and evenings, and we'll do a couple on nights too, to really help connect with everyone. And we'll keep doing evaluations to see how they like it. Next slide, please.
So even though the simulation might take a little bit of design time, it might be worth trialing in your facility to promote skill development and some practice changes. It does immerse the staff in new experience, and it's a safe space to make mistakes. So we hope you can see how to create simulation-based learning, how the training can work, even in long-term care where resources can be limited, and to also see the perceived benefits from the staff themselves from this approach to learning. So thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to our presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Daniela and Amber. I thought that was a really good presentation talking about the use of evidence-based practices when it comes to, the use of simulation, and then applying that to a best practice of post-fall huddles and assessing for risk of falls. I thought it was a really good use of resources, and I really liked the focus on quality. The fact that it was, you were able to do a deep dive into the monitoring and evaluation and find out that there were some, gaps in terms of the quality, and that there was a potential for improvement. Yeah, it's just a really great job. So thank you both.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So there is a question as well as a comment. So we have here Connie Wood. This was a great presentation. Thanks so much. I will certainly share your idea. So definitely I agree as well. Lori, and she has a question. When did you do the simulations?
Like do you mean like which month or during the day? We did the simulations on a couple day shifts. We did 4 day shifts and 2 evenings, and we did them at different times. For us in our workflow, 10 o'clock in the morning, 10:30 is a really good time because the RPNs are done doing their med pass. And then also around 1:15 or 1:30 as well. And we're kind of getting them right before they go on break or right after they come back from break. So that really was helpful for us. And we chose days of the week that were better. So we have Doctor's Day once a week. We did not do a simulation when they had a Doctor's Day, just, because they're going to be overwhelmed already. So that was helpful. And we ran it through the summer.
Oh, excellent. So they close attention to the timing of it so it doesn't overwhelm the staff, and you're able to get the maximum benefit from the simulated learning. Okay, excellent. We have another question. Janet says, awesome learning for us all. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned the simulation course. Where did you find this?
Yeah, so that's one thing I want to mention to everybody. So it does take a bit to make a simulation, but there's a ton of free resources available for everybody on the Simulation One website. So that's SIM dash one ONE.org. And you can you have to log in and create an account, but it's free, and they have templates for making simulations, and then they have all the courses that they offer. And that's where we found it. The course I took was a week, and you had to pay for it, but they also have like some free things there as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And we have Jen. She says, great use of SBE. This post-falls assessment sounds like a systematic approach. I agree. In scenario debriefing works really well for this type of thing. Maybe something to try. Excellent work. So there is a comment there.
Thank you.
Let's see here. And we have here, I can't quite see the name, or maybe out of it, admin at Mount Nemo Christian. Love this idea from a need to improve training to the ministry perspective. I'm wondering if you also offer a more typical type of training to staff. A 24-hour healthcare operation, I assume you wouldn't have had 100% of your staff involved in the simulation.
Yeah, so that's one of the downsides of the simulation, is that you only really get the participants who happen to be working that shift that day. So yeah, we offer other types of training for sure. Like our biggest way of training people is having e-modules where people need, like that can get to absolutely every staff member, and then they can kind of do a self-learning approach. And in certain times and certain types of skills, we do in-services. But in-services are harder for us because we have to backfill on the units, which cost a bit more money. Sometimes you can do on-unit in-services for the same amount of time, like 20 minutes, and that has been effective for wound care, for example. So yeah, I guess there's different options for sure. We kind of went with this one because we thought to try like a bit more of a fun approach. In the falls, you wanted to get into the details of people actually going through all the motions, and we thought that going through a fake simulation would be good. But for other things, for like wound, we've done in services.
Okay, perfect. And do you know approximately the percentage of staff, just curious, percentage of staff that you were able to do the simulation with?
You know what? Like if we went back and we counted, we could give you a number. I don't have that information on me at the moment, but a unit has like 3 shifts of 5 people on different days. So we didn't get a very large chunk of that, like 4 to 5 people on one shift. But we're going to be doing more and going to the same unit on evenings and nights as well. So I think maybe we could probably look at aiming for maybe half.
Okay, that would be good. And then there would be, it sounds like, self-directed learning opportunities, perhaps reflection questions, or something maybe a bit more, maybe a bit comparable to what they've learned in simulation. Okay. From Lori, we have, wondering how long it will be before seeing if there is an impact on falls reduction.
Yeah, so that's what I'm interested in seeing too. So because the data that drove this us to do the simulation, the deep dive, we're probably not going to know if we see an increase in quality until next year when we do another deep dive. We do it once a year. In the spring. So probably in the spring we'll see. I mean, we can always track every month whether our falls rate is going down or up, but we won't know what's causing that because we have a ton of other interventions in place as well, and strategies like our hourly rounding has a big impact as well. But in terms of like the quality of the post-fall assessments and huddles, we're going to see that mostly next year in the spring. However, that being said, like I mentioned, every other month we do like we pick 1 or 2 residents and do sort of like a ministry inspection. And I'm the one who mostly does that. So it'll be, for me, anecdotally, I'll be able to see a little bit over the next couple months if it's making a difference.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Jay Park says, did you perform a simulation on an Alzheimer's unit? And if so, did it affect the residents on the unit?
Yeah, we did it. Actually, a lot of the ones we did happened to be on a dementia heavy unit. We didn't see any impact. I mean, the only thing that I can think of is that one time we started the simulation and one of the PSWs came to me in the middle of the simulation and said they had to go attend to somebody, and then they just left, which was fine. We had the other 3 people there. So what we knew going into this is that if we happen to start a simulation and the residents need something on the unit, obviously they take priority, so we would just stop the simulation and do it another time. But we didn't have that.
Okay, thank you. Habir says, great presentation, thank you. I wonder if you notice if there was any increased falls at a certain time of the day. I mean, I know there is no certain time, but just curious.
Yeah, so one of our deep dive questions is what time of the day were people mostly falling? And what was really interesting, I mean, I don't have the stats on top of my head right now, but what was interesting is that we found that there wasn't really a trend across the facility. That a lot of the times tended to be the same, but we're continuing that deep, we're going to be analyzing the unit level data this week, actually. So I would know probably later this week. But the timing didn't work out for me to answer that question. But it is a good question, and we're looking at that.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And the Adams, does your deep dive investigations include med review?
The one I'm talking about, no. It's just actually going through, breaking down our falls process into different steps and literally going through the chart and seeing if it was done or not.
Okay.
Or what time of day the fall was and what day of the week it was and things like that.
And you were saying
so we do look for med reviews as part of our post-fall assessment that the nurses are supposed to do, but in terms of our deep dive assessment, we didn't really have any way of looking at whether we didn't monitor or track whether they were looking at the med reviews.
Okay. And Pajmina, she says, what were the talking points during the debrief?
So what I tried to have in mind, which in the future I'm going to write these things down, but basically every quality aspect of the post-fall huddle and the post-fall assessment that we knew was an issue before, I tried to make a comment or lead to teaching around those areas. And also observing really closely, being very present when you're watching the simulation so that you can see what people also did, what actions they did that were maybe not matching what the ideal scenario would be, and talking about that too. It's really important in the debrief, to question what people were thinking at a specific time when they made an action, because as an observer, I might look at them and they did a weird assessment or something, and I'm making an assumption why would they do that? But if you ask them, you can see what they were thinking and then try and correct that thinking, or maybe even suddenly join in with that action because you understood why they were thinking that.
Okay, that's a great point. Okay. And Jonathan is asking, how many people minimum did you need to carry out the simulation? And thanks for the presentation.
I guess technically 1, but we wanted at least 2. We did the lowest amount of people we had attend was a group of 2. It was an RPN and a PSW, and that went okay. It was fine. You would need at least 1.
Okay. Yeah, at least 1 participant.
But the more the better. We had most of our simulations had 4 to 5 people, which was the best.
Okay, that's a nice size to be able to, engage in a debrief and be able to pay attention to, what everyone is doing and saying. Okay.
And that's why timing is really important. Me and Amber, we both know the units super well. So we knew the people on specific units we were doing, personally. So because of that, we were able to kind of pick our times very carefully.
Yeah, I think that's really important to understand the workflow and to understand the people so that, you're mindful of when you do the simulation. So that's great. Jay Park says, during your debriefing, did you notice staff coming up with unique interventions or repeating universal intervention for falls prevention?
So that's a really good question. I think like the conversation started with sort of universal interventions, and if it did happen in the simulation, they were generally very universal. But as we were talking in the debrief, I tried to facilitate the conversation into an actual post-fall huddle to model it within the actual debrief. And yeah, I think I can't think of a specific example.
I know that some of them did come up with quite a few unique things. I just can't think of them all.
Yeah, like I remember Amber and I saying like multiple times, "Oh, that was a new idea for this lady's situation." Yeah. So I want to say yes, but I'm sorry I don't have any specific examples on my head.
Okay, that's okay. But good to know that there's unique interventions that come up that may be worth revisiting or taking note of as the leads.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. There's a couple, we can round off the session with a couple more questions. How long does it take to develop a simulation from scratch? And what is the time commitment?
That's a really good question. Developing a simulation does take a bit of time. I worked on it maybe like between 2 to 4 hours a week for about a month and a half. I mean, if you work on it more straight or more direct. But what takes time is not really coming up with the situation. Like the scenario with the resident, I mean, that's very easy. You can make that up in a half an hour. But what really requires the thinking is creating your clear learning objectives and then developing what the simulation looks like to meet these objectives. So it's more to get a better quality one. That took me the amount of time I think that it did. A simulation that, like, I met a bunch of amazing simulationists that work in universities, and they told me it takes them months to create a full simulation for a school. But I think in an in-situ situation here in long-term care, it doesn't need to match that within a university. It's more just meeting your objectives. But it did take me about a month and a half, a little bit a week.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. And in creating a realistic scenario that you would use for simulation for as many staff as you could get, did you get any input from, say, residence council or from the staff, or like how did you go about crafting one? I know you know the workplace and the units well as the staff. So did you pull on that kind of knowledge to be able to generate it, or?
Yeah, so, well, we kind of had a little bit of an advantage because I took the simulation course like a couple months before, and part of the course was to come up with a base scenario, and my team, they thought it was cool that I was working from long-term care because everyone else was from university, so they helped me create in the course like a base fall simulation, so I kind of based it off of that. But if I had to make something from scratch, like what was important was that I wanted it to be evidence-based. So make sure that, if you're using meds, make sure you understand like the impact of those meds and have some evidence behind that when you're making it. Including family and residents would be an awesome idea. I didn't do that this time, but you give me some food for thought for next time, because it would be it would have that real touch and maybe a more realistic scenario. So that's a great idea. And I think I might do that for the next one.
Okay, well, you're welcome. And individuals saying, excellent presentation, thank you, and well done, ladies, thank you, and very helpful presentation. Again, wanting to have the link to the Sim1 website. And in terms of any other resources available, is there anything else that you'd like to be able to share with the audience today?
I believe Andrea is going to send you guys out a copy of the patient profile that we use to send out to all of our staff here. So feel free to use that. You're probably going to have to modify it for your facility though, because ours is very Pearly specific, but feel free to model it. That's fine. To be honest, most of everything, all the resources I used were from Sim1 because I took the course from them and that's where I got the data. But if you can connect with, there's a community there. So if you can connect with other simulationists on the website, I'm sure they can connect you with other information. Also, just so you know, on the Sim1 website, there's an exchange of simulations that have already been made. So if you're looking for a simulation about COPD, you just type it in and search, and if someone has uploaded it, you can use it for free. So I will share the link for that.
Oh, okay, that would be great. Yeah, if you don't have to reinvent the wheel and, you know, start from something, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's the way to go.
Yeah. Okay, so we are out of time. So thank you very much, Danielle and Amber, for that excellent presentation. As you see, it generated a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue. And I think, you know, the systematic way in which you approach this and the attention to the quality and the creativity and the commitment, congratulations. So I think excellent job in the work that you do.
Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to reach out to us for more questions or anything, feel free.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. And in addition to the contact information, I believe the presentation will also be posted on the RNEO website alongside with the recording. So you'll be able to get...
No, we don't post the presentation, but you guys will be receiving it in an email, but the recording will be posted.
Okay, there you go. And once you log off, if you please fill out the evaluation survey. It's because of the evaluation survey, as well as the willingness to share, such as Danielle and Amber, is where we get the topics that are relevant to you. And if you have any questions, please contact Andrea Stubbs. You see her email on the screen. Otherwise, thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.